And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Nowadays, Oklahoma State is one of the winningest football programs of the last few decades. However, fans from previous eras will quickly let you know that the 2024 season isn't so much of an aberration as a reminder of what things used to look like. So let's roll it all the way back to the 1800s and see how we got here. On December 25th, 1890, the Oklahoma Territory finally gained approval for the Oklahoma Territorial Agricultural and Mechanical College, otherwise known as Oklahoma A&M. The Morrill Act of 1862 had technically given the territory permission to build the Land Grant Institute, but it took several years to get everything approved. In fact, students didn't even start attending the college until December 14th, 1891, and classes were held in local churches for the first 2 years of Oklahoma A&M's existence. In 1894, Old Central, the university's first academic building, was constructed, giving students their first real meeting place. In 1896, 6 male graduates completed their education. In 1900, Williams Hall was the first building on campus with electricity. Due to its turreted architecture, it was often called the Castle of the Plains. The next year, the Oklahoma A&M Aggies held their first football season. They did not have a head coach and played home games on a local field. Things did not start well for those Aggies. Their very first game was against Kingfisher College, which was a congregational school from 1895 until 1922 and graduated a total of 117 students during those 30-odd years. Even still, they beat down the Aggies 12-0 on September 27th. The Aggies came back to beat Northwestern Technical Normal, which later became Northwestern Oklahoma State, 17-0. They then lost back-to-back home games against Chilocco and Kingfisher before finishing their inaugural season with a 12-0 win over the Pawnee Indian School. If you look in the official Oklahoma State history books, there was no 1902 season for the Aggies. However, they did technically play one game against Territorial Normal, which is now known as the University of Central Oklahoma. The Aggies reportedly won that game 40-0 on an unknown date and didn't play again that year. 1903 was another season without a coach, and the team managed 2 ties in 2 games. One of those teams was Tonkawa Prep, who they held to a scoreless draw. Interestingly, that university later became a community college, and in 2003, opened a campus in Stillwater, right across the street from Oklahoma State. The other game was a 6-6 tie against Oklahoma City Military Institute. A third game against Southwestern College out of Kansas was unfortunately canceled. 1904 was a historic year for Oklahoma A&M, but not in a good way. The team lost all 6 games that season, including its first ever game against its biggest rival, the Oklahoma Sooners. The game was played at a neutral site in Guthrie, Oklahoma. Temperatures were well below freezing that day, and those heavy Oklahoma winds were sweeping down the plain. Early in the game, the Aggies were punting from deep in their own territory when a huge gust of wind blew the ball behind the punter and out of the end zone. If the Sooners recovered, it would have been a touchdown, while the Aggies could at least get a touchback if they could grab the ball. As that icy pigskin carried out of the field of play and down a hill, the ball rolled into a half-frozen creek, and showing much more toughness than me, the players dived right in. Fittingly, an OU player came out of the bedlam to score a touchdown. The Sooners went on to win that game 75-0, which wasn't too surprising because the Aggies didn't score a single point in 1904. In 1905, A&M finally brought in a coach. F.A. McCoy was his name, and we don't really know too much about him. After all, he was out after a single season, leading the Aggies to a 1-4-2 record. They did score 21 total points that year. They mustered 5 in a win against Central State Normal, and 5 more in a 5-6 loss to the Tulsa Businessmen. The other 11 points came in the season finale, where the Aggies lost 17-11 to Logan County High School. No, you didn't mishear me, they lost to a high school. That sounds weird in 2025, but colleges playing against high school teams wasn't too uncommon in the early 1900s. Coach McCoy was out after the season, and the school brought in a man named Boyd Hill. Hill had been the head coach for Central State Normal in 1904 before taking over at Haskell after graduating from college. In his lone season at the helm, he led Haskell to a 5-4-1 record. Things started out rough in Stillwater with 4 straight losses, including 2 losses to Hill's old school, Central State. That said, the Aggies showed some progress against the Sooners, only losing 23-0, so things were kind of looking up. A&M finished the season with 2 ties and 1 win, ending the year with a 1-4-2 record, so exactly where they were the previous season. But this time, Hill was sticking around, giving the team some stability for the first time. 1907 began with a 10-0 win against Tonkawa Prep. The rest of the season quickly fell off the rails. The Aggies finished the year with a 1-5-2 record, including an embarrassing 67-0 loss against OU at Boyd Field in Norman. The next coach through the door was Ed Perry, and for once, this guy had a legit resume. He'd played tackle for the University of Chicago and won a national title with the team in 1905. He'd also learned under legendary coach Amos Alonzo Stagg, who had led his team to 2 college football championships. Under Perry's watch, the team limped to an 0-3 start, but only lost 18-0 to the Sooners, though to be fair, it was a home game. However, the team turned it around, ending the season on a 4-1 streak and scoring victories over Oklahoma City University, Southwestern College, Chilocco, and Central State Normal. At 4-4, it was A&M's best season so far. Unfortunately, Perry left after the season wrapped up, and the university decided to bring in Paul J. Davis ahead of the 1909 season. Previously, Davis had led Dickinson College, his alma mater, to a 5-4 record in 1908 before joining Oklahoma A&M. Importantly, he did not simply coach football for the Aggies. He was also the athletic director and coached baseball and basketball through most of his tenure. Davis's first season went well, going 5-3, though the Aggies did start the season with a 5-0 loss to Oklahoma City High School. For the most part, that was the tale of Davis's 6 years at the helm. A&M was never terrible, with only 1 losing season during that stretch, but it struggled to beat the stronger universities of the era. Davis never beat OU, though he did get close, with a 7-0 nail-biter in 1913. During his tenure, he scored 2 big wins over Arkansas and victories over Texas A&M in 1913 and Baylor in 1914. Davis's team also had a few more notable moments in 1914. On October 9th, the team beat Phillips 134-0, setting an all-time record for points scored by the school. And on November 6th, the Aggies scored their first ever points against OU. They lost 28-6, but they had finally made it onto the scoreboard. 1914 was also the year A&M named its football field. Previously known as simply Athletic Field, the university decided to name it after former Dean of Veterinary Medicine and Science and Literature, Lowry Lehman Lewis. In 1914, Lewis, an incredibly popular figure on campus, was also serving as the acting president, and the athletic field was now known by all as Lewis Field. Davis's record sat at 28-16-1 after 6 seasons, but he decided to head to North Dakota Agricultural, which we now know as FCS powerhouse North Dakota State. That opened the door for John G. Griffith to take over as head coach. He'd played fullback for Iowa during college, helping that team to an undefeated record in both of his final 2 seasons. After graduating, he spent some time coaching at Idaho and Iowa. Like many coaches of the era, he coached several sports at each of his stops, so he was also the Aggies basketball coach during his tenure. Griffith's first season was mediocre, but notable for one reason. Oklahoma A&M joined the newly formed Southwest Conference, finally giving it a home after more than a decade as an independent. At the outset, the Southwest Conference consisted of Southwestern, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Arkansas, Baylor, Texas, Texas A&M, and Rice. Griffith went 0-3 in conference play that season, but the team continued to show signs of life against the Sooners, losing just 26-7. The Aggies had another average season in 1916, losing 41-7 against OU at a neutral site game in Oklahoma City. That year was also A&M's first test against Texas. ending with a relatively close 14-6 Longhorns victory. Griffith left for New Mexico A&M after the season, and former University of Illinois student Earl Ardell Pritchard took over for 2 years. Things got off to a slow start under Pritchard, as the team lost 3 straight without a single point scored. The Aggies turned things around with back-to-back wins over Warrensburg Normal and Central State, before losing a 7-3 nail-biter to Texas and Austin. A win against Kendall and a loss to the Army boys at Camp MacArthur set up a season-ending matchup against the Sooners. 5,000 people were in the OKC stands that day, expecting yet another OU beatdown. Instead, the Sooners played sloppy football despite their superior skill. A&M did not cross midfield before halftime, but OU kept giving them chances, turning the ball over 5 times. The Aggies eventually scored a touchdown and added a safety to give the school its first ever win over its hated rivals 9-0. And with that, it's highly unlikely that Pritchard or any of those players had to pay for a beer in Stillwater ever again. Between the waning days of World War I and the outbreak of the Spanish flu, the Aggies only played 6 games in 1918, going 4-2 and losing the season finale to who else? OU 27-0. Pritchard left the school, and James Ebenezer Pixley took over, though everyone just called him by his nickname, Possum Jim. During his 2 seasons in charge, the Aggies went 3-10-3 and never won a conference game. That does not mean his tenure wasn't important for the school. In 1920, his final season in charge, Oklahoma A&M held its first ever official homecoming event on October 30th. 90 alumni attended the celebration. Surprisingly, the now famous house decorations started that first season as several sororities decorated their doorways to greet the alumni. Unfortunately, the football team did not hold up its end of the bargain, losing 35-0 to Texas A&M. That year, the university also constructed a wooden grandstand around Lewis Field, giving it an 8,000-seat capacity. They also switched the field direction to its iconic east-west orientation to mitigate the effects of those notorious Oklahoma winds that had blown that ball into the river a decade prior. And while Possum Jim was out after the season, his legacy for the Cowboys isn't quite over, because his next school was Westminster in Missouri, where he coached a young man named Henry Iba, who later in life would become one of Oklahoma State's all-time great basketball coaches, winning 2 national championships for the school and serving as its athletic director for 35 years. John Malbesh took over as A&M's head coach in 1921. He was a consensus All-American halfback for Field Yost at Michigan in 1914 and had turned Phillips University in Enid, Oklahoma into a powerhouse, besting OU in 1918 and Texas in 1919 in shocking upsets. And if you remember, that's the team the Aggies had beaten 134-0 just a few years prior. But Malbesh was a great coach, and he led Phillips to an undefeated season in 1919, so many thought he might be the answer to the Aggies' problems. Unfortunately, he was never able to recapture that magic with Oklahoma A&M. But that doesn't mean his run with the team wasn't incredibly important. The first big thing that happened under Malbesh was in 1923. That year, the university was looking for a new mascot to replace the Tiger, which they had pretty much stolen wholesale from Princeton. They wanted something more unique, and students found their answer following the Armistice Day Parade in Stillwater. They noticed a man named Frank Eaton and asked if he would be interested in being the model for a new cowboy mascot. Eaton was born in 1860 in Hartford, Connecticut, but moved with his family to Kansas when he was just 8 years old. That same year, his father, an abolitionist, was shot in cold blood by 6 former Confederate soldiers. By Eaton's own account, his father's friend Mose Beeman told the young man, "My boy, may an old man's curse rest upon you if you do not try to avenge your father." He then taught Frank the finer points of handling a gun. When he was just 15, Eaton visited Fort Gibson in Oklahoma and outshot every soldier in the cavalry, earning himself the nickname Pistol Pete. He also claimed that a girlfriend gave him a cross as a teen that kept him from dying during his life as a lawman after it deflected a bullet, so it's fair to say that Eaton might have stretched the truth from time to time. As the story goes, Pistol Pete then went hunting down his father's killers, shooting Shannon Campsey on his own front porch. Then he took down Doc Ferber with two .45 slugs through his breast. John Ferber was supposed to be next, but the day before Eaton caught up to him, he was shot for cheating at cards. Eaton made sure to attend his funeral to confirm the kill himself. Eaton claims that he then became a deputy U.S. Marshal under hanging judge Isaac C. Parker when he was only 17. He then tracked down Jim and Joints Campsey, taking them out in a quick gunfight. He finally tracked down Wiley Campsey in New Mexico, shooting him in a ballroom fight along with two of Campsey's hired gunmen. And with that, Pistol Pete had avenged his father's murder. He quickly became known as the fastest draw in Oklahoma and was remembered as a man who could toss a coin in the air, draw his gun, and shoot it before it hit the ground. That was the guy Oklahoma A&M wanted as its mascot. And while the Cowboys moniker didn't become official until 1957, Eaton would attend events and sign autographs until his death in 1958. While Malbash struggled a bit during his early days, he did lead the Cowboys to their second win over the Sooners in 1924. A&M defended its home field on homecoming, beating OU 6-0 in a hard-fought slugfest. In 1925, A&M joined the Missouri Valley Intercollegiate Athletic Association, leaving the Southwest Conference alongside the hated Sooners. 3 years later, the conference split in two. Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Iowa State, Kansas State, and OU formed the MVIAA, which eventually became the Big Seven Conference. Meanwhile, Oklahoma A&M stuck with smaller schools like Drake, Grinnell, Washington University in St. Louis, and Creighton to become the Missouri Valley Conference. Despite going 3-4-1, the Cowboys won their first conference title in 1926. That year, guard Hal Weisinger became the first all-conference player for A&M. Malbesh's men picked up another win over OU in 1927, taking down the Sooners on their own turf with a 13-7 victory at Memorial Stadium. However, he went 1-7 in 1928, including a 46-0 drubbing at the hands of OU on homecoming, which finished his career with the Cowboys. Pappy Waldorf, who played tackle for Syracuse in the early 1920s, became the head coach in 1929 after a successful stint with Oklahoma City University. He was just 26 when he took over, but he quickly installed a system that focused on fundamentals and hired Albert Exendine, who had previously played under legendary coach Pop Warner, as his assistant. The duo developed several backfield groups that would rotate into the game based on the on-field situation. It seems quaint now, but this was an innovation at the time, as teams rarely used subs, and it helped keep the Cowboys fresh. On top of that, Pappy convinced the university to move game day. He had lights installed at Lewis Field, and the Pokes started to play home games on Friday nights instead of Saturday afternoons. During that first season, his methods paid off. The Cowboys went 4-3-2, tying OU in Memorial Stadium 7-7. Pappy's team was even better in 1930, going 7-2-1 to claim the title of co-Missouri Valley champs with Drake. He also beat Oklahoma in front of 18,000 fans at Lewis Field, largely on the legs of two-time All-Missouri Valley running back Jake Asher Baker. If you agree with Oklahoma State's status as running back U, which is definitely an argument I will be making at some point during this series, Asher Baker is sort of the godfather. They just missed out on repeating as conference champs the next year with an 8-2-1 record, tying OU 0-0 to end the season in Norman. Pappy came back to win back-to-back Missouri Valley titles in 1932 and 1933, also beating OU both years. At that point, Pappy was sitting on a 34-10-7 record, with the key distinction of never losing to the Sooners. However, the school was struggling with finances due to the ongoing difficulties with the Great Depression. He had taken on athletic director duties in 1931, but the team could not find a way to pay him more money. If only T. Boone Pickens had been born 50 years earlier. Pappy left after the 1933 season and joined Kansas State for a year, before starting a very successful run at the helm of Northwestern that saw him win the first ever National College Football Coach of the Year award in 1935. Despite losing Pappy, things didn't look too bad. Albert Exendine was taking over, Not only was he an All-American player under Pop Warner and Pappy's assistant, but he had previously had a successful head coaching stint at Georgetown from 1914 to 1921. And while he did play OU to a 0-0 tie in 1934, he went 4-5 on the season. The next year, A&M stumbled to a 3-7 record, finding itself in the basement of the Missouri Valley. Ted Cox took over in 1936 after leading Tulane to an SEC championship and Sugar Bowl win in 1934. Unfortunately, he went 1-9 during his first season, though receiver L.B. Ashbury was a bright spot, making his third straight All-MVC team. Things got a little better over the next 2 seasons, but Cox's run with the Cowboys was largely a disappointment. The most notable moment of his tenure came in 1938, when the Chicago Bears made center George Vogler the first draft pick from Oklahoma A&M, picking him in the 20th round. He never played in the league, but he is a fun piece of trivia. Cox was out after 3 years, and Jim Lookabaugh took over as the Second World War started. He was the first coach in Cowboys history who was also an alumnus of the university. He had lettered in football, basketball, and baseball in the mid-1920s, and came to A&M after coaching at a few Oklahoma high schools. When he stepped on campus, the Cowboys were coming off of a 2-8 season under Cox. He instantly turned things around, at least in conference play. A&M finished the 1939 season with a 5-4-1 record and lost 41-0 to Oklahoma, but went 3-1 in conference play to finish the season on a strong note. The Aggies almost pulled off an upset over OU in year 2, losing just 29-27 in a close-fought contest in Stillwater. The Cowboys' record improved to 6-3-1 and 4-1 in the Missouri Valley, though the 19-6 loss to Tulsa to end the season was something of a downer. 1941 started with back-to-back losses to Oklahoma and Texas. The misery extended into October as A&M started the year 1-4 before ending the season with 4 straight wins to secure a winning record. Another slow start in 1942 again kept the team behind Tulsa for the MVC crown, but Lookabaugh was beginning to show that he could develop pro-level talent. In the 1943 NFL Draft alone, 4 Pokes were selected, including NCAA wrestling champion and future NFL champ Lloyd Arms. 1943 was a strange one, as many players were off fighting in World War II, though that's probably true about many years in the 1940s. However, this year is notable because the only teams that played in the Missouri Valley Conference were Tulsa and Oklahoma A&M. The Golden Hurricanes wrapped up the conference title with a 55-6 win at Skelly Field in Tulsa, securing their 4th straight conference title. Thankfully for the Cowboys, the true granddaddy of running back U was about to make his presence felt. Bob, the Blonde Bomber Fenimore, was born in 1925 in Whitworth, Oklahoma, making him the small town's second greatest product after yours truly. He decided to take his prodigious skill on the gridiron to Oklahoma A&M in 1943, but did not truly explode onto the national scene until 1944. During that season, the Cowboys were dominant on both sides of the ball through much of the season. Fenimore & Co. ripped off 5 straight wins to start the season. On October 28th, the Cowboys traveled to Skelly Field to take on the mighty Tulsa Hurricanes. Heading into the game, both teams were undefeated, and it was the heavyweight battle fans were hoping for. The Cowboys came out on top of the slugfest, 46-40. Unfortunately, the high was short-lived because they dropped their next game against Norman Naval Air Station. That day, the Stillwater weather was dumping rain on the field, helping keep Fenimore in check and ruining the perfect season. Still, they did not lose again that year, beating OU and Texas in back-to-back games before absolutely dismantling TCU in the Cotton Bowl 34-0, making the Cowboys' first bowl game a memorable one. On the season, A&M outscored their opponents 228-103, with 40 of those points scored by Tulsa. Fenimore ran for 897 yards, passed for 861 more, and scored 53 points. Cecil Hankins was his main man through the air, racking up 474 yards receiving. Fenimore became the first Oklahoma A&M player to be named to the All-American team, grabbing first-team honors. And that was only the beginning. The 1945 season is technically the high point of Cowboys football. the season began with back-to-back road wins over Arkansas and Denver. Against Arkansas alone, Fenimore led the rushing attack to 432 yards, absolutely bulldozing the Razorbacks. A&M then faced down SMU in a neutral site game in Oklahoma City. Fenimore tossed 4 interceptions, but made up for it with his legs, ripping off several big runs en route to a 26-12 victory. After that, it was back on the road for the Cowboys, this time to Utah, and there, Fenimore gave the other players a chance to shine. He did nab 2 touchdown runs, but the Cowboys won 46-6, giving everybody a chance to eat. A&M had one more away game against TCU, grabbing a 25-12 win, despite Fenimore suffering from a stomach bug early in the week. It was November, and the Cowboys were finally ready to defend Lewis Field, taking on Tulsa in a battle between ranked teams. A&M came out on top 12-5 and took Texas Tech to the woodshed the next week, winning 46-6 in Stillwater. A trip to Norman was up next, but the Sooners did not give the Cowboys any trouble. A&M walked into Memorial Stadium as the 6th-ranked team in the country and blasted the Sooners 47-0. That set up a Sugar Bowl matchup against 7th-ranked St. Mary's. 75,000 fans were in attendance to see Fenimore run over, around, and through the Gales, though it has to be said that the Cowboys' offensive line was nearly as impressive during the game. The Pokes won 33-13, finishing the season with an unbeaten record and an MVC crown. In the final AP poll, Army was named the national champs, thanks in no small part to Heisman winner Doc Blanchard. However, 71 years later, the AFCA named Oklahoma A&M its national champions. Now, even as a graduate of the school, I personally don't claim that title, but the committee says it picked the Cowboys because Army didn't play a postseason game that year. I'll leave the final determination about the validity of that win up to the experts, but I personally would not have hung the banner decades later. Regardless, Fenimore was named an All-American once again, after leading the nation in rushing. He finished 3rd in Heisman voting behind Blanchard, and still had his senior season left on the books. On top of that, in Neil Armstrong, a 3rd-team All-American player himself, was joining Fenimore for one last season. Things were looking bright in Stillwater. The season started well against Denver, as the Cowboys opened with a 40-7 win at Lewis Field, bringing their current win streak to 20. Then, Fenimore had a nasty knee injury the next week against Arkansas. The Cowboys held on for a 21-21 tie, but the Blonde Bomber's knee gave him trouble throughout the season. That was bad news for A&M. Fenimore left during the first quarter of the next game against Texas, and the Longhorns put up a 54-7 beatdown with the star on the sideline. And that was the story of the season. Fenimore was solid when healthy, even picking up first-team All-MVC honors alongside Neil Armstrong, but his ability as a running back was essentially gone by the end of 1946, and the Pokes went 3-7-1, culminating in what else? A 73-12 loss to OU, and the kicker, it was in Stillwater. Fenimore didn't even suit up for the game. Despite the injury, the Bears picked Fenimore first overall in the 1947 draft. To date, he is the only first overall pick in the university's history. Unfortunately, he only managed a single season with Chicago before retiring and moving on to a career in insurance back in Oklahoma. Fenimore was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame in 1972 and became the 3rd person in Oklahoma State's Ring of Honor in 2022. Meanwhile, Neil Armstrong was picked 8th overall by the Eagles. He helped the team win 2 NFL titles in 1948 and 1949, before spending several years playing in Canada and becoming a coach at the pro level. The Cowboys had another poor season in 1947, but rebounded in 1948. Lookabaugh's men went 6-4 on the season to win another MVC title. The team was led by its line, as tackle Charles Shaw and guards Wayne Burrow and Dee Messenheimer made the All-MVC team. Unfortunately, the Cowboys ended the season on a series of down notes. First, they lost to OU 19-15 at home, before losing 20-0 to William & Mary in the Delta Bowl in Memphis, Tennessee. The big bright spot, running back Billy Grimes was a top 20 pick in that year's draft, and went on to make 2 Pro Bowls with the Packers. 1949 proved to be Lookabaugh's final year as a coach. his team went 4-4-1, led by Jack Hartman, who had 1,278 yards passing. In his final game before retiring, the veteran ball coach lost 41-0 to the Sooners, who, by the way, were undefeated that year, but don't claim the national title. So maybe, every once in a while, Oklahoma State could learn something from the Sooners. Lookabaugh resigned after the season and moved into a career in real estate. To that point, he was the most successful coach in school history, accumulating a record of 58, 41-6, 3 conference titles, and 1 kind of national championship. And, for what it's worth, he was a homegrown talent, a Cowboy through and through, something that proved very important a few decades later. With the longest tenured coach out after 11 seasons at the helm, and 1 questionable championship that was awarded 20 years after he died, the Cowboys needed another solid hire. They signed J.B. Whitworth, an assistant coach at Georgia who had played tackle for Alabama in the 30s. To be fair to Whitworth's men, they had a tough first season, going up against SMU, the number 2 ranked team in the country early in the season, and ending the year against number 1 ranked Oklahoma. Still, it was a bit of a letdown as the Pokes went 4-6-1, once again becoming 3rd best in the state behind OU and Tulsa. 51 was even worse at 3-7, though end George Wooden impressed enough to pick up all MVC honors at season's end with 502 receiving yards. After another poor showing in 52, Jennings finally turned things around in 1953, thanks in large part to running back Earl "Earthquake" Lunsford. Earthquake led the team in rushing with 748 yards, and A&M ran to a 7-3 season. That included a 3-1 record in the MVC, giving the Cowboys a share of the conference title with Detroit. That was the school's 8th conference title, but they didn't win another one for more than 2 decades, so savor this moment, Cowboys fans. Jennings had one last season in Stillwater, going 5-4-1 before leaving to take the Alabama job in 1955. In some ways, you can't blame the guy for taking over his alma mater, but my man might be the worst coach in Alabama history, though his complete and total lack of success led to Bear Bryant taking over, so swings and roundabouts. In addition to his mediocre record at Oklahoma State and poor showing at Bama, Whitworth oversaw one of the darkest on-field incidents at Lewis Field in 1951. The Aggies were playing Drake, who had an African-American player named Johnny Bright. He was a preseason Heisman candidate, and A&M players openly claimed that they were targeting him during the game. Guard Will Banks Smith knocked Bright unconscious 3 times in the first 7 minutes. It's not totally clear if coaches were involved, but some reports have indicated that at least some of the coaches were egging on the incident during practice. Either way, Bright had to leave the game with a broken jaw, and Drake left the MVC in protest when no apology was given. Bright still finished in 5th in Heisman voting and went on to have a long career in the Canadian Football League. Smith never apologized, though Oklahoma State finally gave a formal apology in 2005. 22 years after Bright's death. Meanwhile, Oklahoma A&M decided to take their next hiring decision in an interesting direction. Cliff Speegle was born in Oklahoma and played his college ball at OU before spending 1 season playing for the Chicago Cardinals in the NFL, which we know today as the Arizona Cardinals. He then spent 2 years as an assistant at Oklahoma A&M under Jim Lookabaugh, before spending a few years jumping between high school and Canada. In some ways, it was like bringing in the enemy to lead the troops, but Speegle also had ties to the Cowboys, making him a relatively easy sell for the Pokes faithful. Then, Speagle's squad went 2-8 in 1955, leaving fans a little less excited. Granted, Earthquake ran for nearly 600 yards, and to his credit, went on to become a CFL All-Star after graduating, but the bright spots were few. In fact, the only real positive was the 14-0 win over Tulsa just before Halloween. The Pokes went 3-5-2 the next year, which was the school's final season in the Missouri Valley Conference. Technically, the Cowboys were planning to join the Big 8. However, conference rules at the time required the Pokes to go independent for a few seasons before joining, so Speagle's men didn't play in a conference for 3 years. That kinda turned out to work in their favor. In 1957, Oklahoma A&M was officially renamed Oklahoma State making this script much easier. Speegle also led the Pokes to a winning season, going 6-3-1 with big wins over Tulsa and Texas Tech. Sure, OU blasted them 53-6 to end the season, but things were looking up for the unaffiliated Cowboys. 1958 was even better. Jim Wood led the way from the end position, becoming the first All-American since Fenimore and Armstrong were running around Lewis Field a decade earlier. He was a standout on defense, but also caught 21 passes for nearly 300 yards and handled punting duties for the Pokes. The next year, Oklahoma State finished the season 8-3, losing to Tulsa, Air Force, and Oklahoma, but grabbing a massive win over 15th-ranked Houston midway through the season, which helped propel the Pokes to the Bluegrass Bowl against Florida State. Oklahoma State came in on top 15-6, thanks to a few missed field goals from the Noles early in the game and 2 Dwayne Wood touchdowns. Funnily enough, the conditions were so icy that most players wore tennis shoes instead of cleats. However, the most notable fact from this game is that it was legendary announcer Howard Cosell's first national telecast. Speegle led the team to a relatively ho-hum 6-4 season during its last year as an independent, before joining the Big 8 in 1960. Unfortunately, things in the new conference did not go well. The Pokes started the season with back-to-back losses to ranked opponents on the road, losing to 19th-ranked Arkansas and 16th-ranked Missouri. While the Pokes grabbed a 28-7 win at Tulsa the following week, their first season in the Big 12 was largely forgettable, finishing with a 3-7 record. Speagle's boys improved to 4-6 in 1961, with halfback Jim Dillard earning second-team All-Big 8 honors behind 627 yards rushing and 71 yards receiving. It was more of the same in 62, Speagle's final season at the helm. With Speegle out, the Cowboys turned to one of Bear Bryant's disciples, Phil Cutchin. In his first season, they were dreadful, posting a 1-8 record with the lone victory coming against Tulsa. The next year, the Cowboys improved to 4-6, thanks in large part to the legs of Walt Garrison, who ran for 740 yards. Oklahoma State ended the season on a 3-game losing streak, dropping games to 4th-ranked Nebraska, Kansas State, and OU, but it still felt like they were moving in the right direction. Cutchins' next season was his best, at least in terms of drama. The team only went 3-7, but the season finale against the Sooners at Memorial Stadium was an all-time classic. On December 4th, 1965, the Pokes held on to beat the Sooners 17-16, giving them their first victory over OU in 20 years. Despite losing Garrison to the draft, Cutchins' men were even better in 1966, going 4-5-1 and once again besting Oklahoma to end the season. This time, defensive backs Charles Trimble and Willard Nargang stopped OU tailback Ron Schatz at the goal line on a 2-point conversion to win 15-14. For the first time since that magical season in 1945, Oklahoma State had put up back-to-back victories over the Sooners. For reference, and to spoil the future a bit, the Cowboys have managed back-to-back wins over OU only 4 times in more than 100 years. Unfortunately, Cutchin never improved on that string of wins. He did recruit 2-time All-American lineman John Kolb, but never had a winning season and was gone from the team by 1969. That year, Floyd Gass took over. Like Lookabaugh, he played for Oklahoma State, lettering in football and basketball during his playing days. Unfortunately, he never enjoyed a similar level of success. Gass spent 3 years with the university, and while John Ward made the All-American team in 1969 before joining the Minnesota Vikings, Gass's team struggled to win. In fact, the most notable thing about his tenure might be the change to AstroTurf at Lewis Field in 1971. In 1972, Dave Smith took over for a season, going 7-4, with big wins over 3rd-ranked Colorado and 17th-ranked Iowa, but losses to Nebraska and OU, before leaving to take the SMU job. In 1973, Jim Stanley took over as head coach. He played college ball at Texas A&M before spending most of the 60s as the defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State. He had rejoined the Cowboys alongside Gass in 1972, again as the defensive coordinator, before becoming the head coach. In his first season, the Pokes posted a winning record of 5-4-2, thanks in large part to tight end Reuben Gant, who was selected in the first round by the Bills in that year's draft. In 1974, Stanley rode quarterback Charlie Weatherby to a 7-5 record. And while George Palmer got the bulk of the carries, freshman Terry Miller showed his dynamic ability with 335 yards rushing. That year, the team faced 17th-ranked BYU in the Fiesta Bowl. During the game, all Big 8 defensive tackle Phil Dokes ran over BYU's quarterback, limiting his effectiveness after it was announced that the QB had strained a ligament in his throwing shoulder. The Pokes ultimately won a defensive battle 16-6 in front of 51,000 fans. 1975 was Terry Miller's coming out party. The sophomore running back ran for 1,206 yards and 11 touchdowns to lead the Big 8 in scores. The Pokes finished the season with a 7-4 record, but the team's only losses came to ranked teams. And while they were not selected for a bowl game, it's hard to argue Stanley's Cowboys weren't headed in the right direction. Miller was even better in 1976, following in the footsteps of Bob Fenimore to become a top running back behind 1,541 yards and 20 TDs. He finished 4th in Heisman voting, though I'd argue he had better seasons than Rob Lytle and Ricky Bell. Either way, the Pokes finished with a 9-3 record. Stanley's men dropped games to the 12th-ranked Arkansas and 9th-ranked Nebraska on the road, but picked up a massive 31-24 win over 5th-ranked OU at Memorial Stadium in Norman. And while Miller was the star, it's impossible to overstate how important Phil Dokes was for the team. The All-American is still the all-time leader in fumble recoveries for the university, and racked up 106 tackles in 76 to earn that All-American nod. The Pokes rode their 2 All-Americans to a share of the Big 8 title alongside Colorado and a top 15 ranking at season's end. They blasted BYU in that year's Tangerine Bowl, winning 49-21 behind Terry Miller's 173 yards and 4 touchdowns. Dokes was picked by the Bills in the first round of that year's draft, but Miller returned for his senior season in 1977, and he certainly did his part, rushing for 1,680 yards and 14 touchdowns to make the All-American team for the second time and finish in second for Heisman voting behind Texas stud Earl Campbell. However, the rest of the team couldn't keep up. The Pokes started the season 3-3, dropping close games to Florida State and Colorado, but they finished the season with 4 straight losses, putting a big damper on Miller's senior season. Still, the Bills picked the 2-time All-American 5th overall in the 1978 draft. Unfortunately, his NFL career didn't really pan out, but he was named to the College Football Hall of Fame in 2022. Without their talisman, the Pokes fell to a 3-8 record in 1978, losing 62-7 to OU during the season finale. At the same time, the Big 8 started an investigation into allegations around Jim Stanley's program, which led to the coach leaving the team. Stanley left to join the Giants ahead of the 1979 season, leaving Oklahoma State looking for a coach once again. Ultimately, the university settled on an up-and-coming defensive mastermind who played college ball at Arkansas alongside future Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones. Coach Jimmy Johnson had shown an aptitude for recruiting by bringing Terry Bradshaw to Louisiana Tech in the 60s, but it was his dominant defense at Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Pitt that convinced Oklahoma State he was the man for the job. While things looked bad in 1978, hopes were high that Jimmy Johnson could make a quick turnaround.